In the House of Records in Minas Tirith, beside the Red Book of Westmarch brought by the Fellowship's halflings, lies an ancient scroll untouched by mortal hands since the Fourth Age. Its weathered pages speak of a final war, of Morgoth himself breaking free from the void, and of heroes who fought once more. This is the tale of the Dagor Dagorath, the battle of all battles, when the fate of all creation hung in the balance. None can say with certainty when it began. Beyond the walls of night, in the void where Ea ends, Morgoth awakened from his ageless slumber. The first dark enemy who had been cast through the door of night at the end of the First Age now gathered his strength, while his jailer's might had waned through endless years of watching. For ages of the world, his malice had grown only stronger in the void. The first signs appeared as strange winter descended upon Middle-earth. Snow fell heavily across lands. The white blanket spread south day by day, burying the northern kingdoms. In the mountains, great wolves descended into the valleys, their howls rising in savage joy as they sensed their master's awakening. Deep beneath the northern wastes where Angband once stood, something far more terrible awakened. Not just the heirs of Glaurung, but the great dragons of old themselves stirred as Morgoth's power reached across death itself. Ancalagon the Black, mightiest of all winged dragons, rose first from the abyss where he had fallen in the War of Wrath. His vast wings, that had once blotted out the sun itself, unfurled once more as his spirit was drawn back into reconstructed flesh. Behind him rose Glaurung himself, father of dragons, his golden scales gleaming with renewed malice. Then came Scatter the Worm, Smaug the Golden, and all the great worms of ages past, their bodies reformed by Morgoth's will, their fires burning hotter than ever before. The earth shuddered as they broke free. Great cracks appeared in the ancient ice that had sealed Morgoth's fortress, steam rising as if the forges below still burned. The ground split and heaved as more fire drake and cold drake kin emerged from deeper chambers. From the deepest pits of the ruined fortress rose darker shapes still. The Balrogs awakened, their wings of shadow and flame unfurling for the first time since the Elder Days. Gothmog, their lord, arose where he had fallen in Gondolin, his whip of flame cracking through the darkness. Behind him, his brethren stirred, those who had hidden in the deep places of the earth and those whose spirits Morgoth now drew. Across the scarred lands, ancient breeding pits burst open. Orcs poured forth, bearing weapons forged in fires that should never have burned again. And in Mordor itself, the very stones of Barad-dûr shifted, as Sauron's spirit was drawn forth from the void, drawn to serve his ancient lord once more. All this unfolded in mere moments, as if time itself bent to Morgoth's will. Yet these were only preludes to an even greater sundering. At the edge of the world, where the sky meets the void, the doors of night cracked. These gates, forged by the Valar themselves to contain Melkor, had stood inviolate since the end of the First Age. Now, hairline fractures appeared in their divine craftsmanship, spreading like frost across glass. Each crack widened, carrying winter's bite to lands that had never known frost. The air grew thin and cold around elven havens, while unnatural darkness pressed against their strongest wards. Stars above their shelters flickered and shifted position, as if the very constellations were being rewritten by some malevolent force. Their most ancient enchantments began to fail in cascading waves. The fundamental laws that governed magic started to unravel. The Valar felt these disturbances from their halls in Valinor. Manwë, king of the Valar, stood upon Tanicatil's peak and gazed eastward. Yet his sight found only growing shadow. The winds now carried whispers of dread. In the gardens of Lorien, the trees shed their leaves out of season. The fountains of Ulmo froze, their waters turning black before solidifying into spikes of dark ice. In the halls of Aule, the great smith of the Valar threw open his deepest vaults. From chambers unopened since the War of Wrath came weapons of terrible power, blades that had tasted dragon blood, spears that could pierce the scales of Ancalagon himself. His Maya servants swept through ancient armories, gathering arms of divine craft that had slept in darkness for ages. Each new break in the doors sent shockwaves across the sky. Stars winked out in expanding circles. Mountain peaks shattered, sending avalanches onto the valleys below. Ancient trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their bark hardening into armor, their branches becoming claws. Deep lakes froze from their depths upward, the ice strange and dark, spreading poison through the waters that remained liquid. In Valinor, the Eldar raised their voices in songs of power not sung since the Elder Days, while in Middle-earth, the few remaining elven havens casted their most powerful protections. Men of the western kingdoms looked to their watchtowers with weapons drawn. Those who remembered the old tales recognized the signs. From the highest towers of Gondor to the northernmost settlements of Arnor, horns sounded, calling all to arms against a darkness older than the sun itself. Yet the lawmasters who had spent their lives studying the ancient prophecies knew these preparations would not suffice. No mortal weapon, no elven song, no fortress of stone could stand against what was to come. For this was the hour long foretold, when even the mightiest defenses would crumble like autumn leaves in a storm. In the timeless halls of Mandos, where the dead await until the ending of the world, Namo broke the ancient laws. For it had been decreed by Ilúvatar himself that Túrin Turambar, greatest foe of Morgoth among all the race of men, would return for this final battle. And so it was that Túrin's spirit rose first in Mandos's halls, his form solidifying until his footsteps echoed on the stone floors. Other warriors followed, Húrin, Fingolfin, and thousands who had fallen fighting Morgoth. Their weapons materialized in their hands, armor settling onto their shoulders. The halls of the dead, silent for ages, now rang with the sound of marching feet and clashing steel as the ancient heroes prepared for battle. Each warrior bore the arms they had wielded in life. Fingolfin's sword, Ringel, gleamed with ice-blue light, while ancient blades flickered with the memory of battles long past. Orome led his hunters from Valinor's gates, their hooves striking sparks from the stone streets. 10,000 riders strong, their spears caught the dimming light, each weapon tempered with power against the darkness. Behind them marched Tulkars with his warriors, their armor ringing with each step as they took formation. Each warrior carried weapons specifically forged to combat the great dragons of old, blessed steel that could pierce even dragon scales, arrows fletched with feathers from Manwë's eagles that could find their mark through dragonfire. They assembled on the plains outside Valmar, the dead of Mandos, the hunters of Orome, and the warriors of Tulkars. 3 hosts united as one, the greatest army ever gathered in Valinor since the breaking of Thangorodrim. As these mighty hosts assembled, the doors of night finally gave way. The hour of their testing had come. The doors of night shattered at the edge of the world, where the star fields meet the void. Through the gap poured absolute darkness, and from it emerged Melkor, vast as a mountain that wades in the sea, his head above the clouds, crowned in smoke and wreathed in ice and fire. His first step back into the world crushed the remains of the doors beneath his feet. His second step carried him to the shores of Valinor. At his coming, the sun's flame guttered and died, while the moon's silver light faded to nothing. From the shores of Valinor, Morgoth raised his hand to the eastern sky, and the seas parted, revealing an ancient road that had been hidden since the breaking of the world, the bridge to Valinor itself. Across this impossible path surged his armies. Though the distance between Middle-earth and the Blessed Realm had been made vast beyond measure since the world was bent, in this moment, space and time held no meaning. Leagues folded like paper at Morgoth's will. Ancalagon the Black led the host through the air, his wings spanning leagues, each beat creating storms beneath him. Behind him came Glaurung, father of dragons, crawling upon the crystalline bridge. The assembled might of all dragonkind throughout history darkened the sky, while Balrogs strode through their own flames, and great wolves bounded forward across the shortened distance. Behind them came the endless ranks of orcs, crossing the vast gulf between Middle-earth and Valinor in mere moments. The plains of Valinor became the battleground of prophecy. The hosts of the Valar lined the golden fields in countless ranks. 3,000 elven archers of the Vanyar in the vanguard, their arrows blessed with the light of ancient days. Behind them stood 3 mighty hosts among many. Above, Vingolo sailed through the darkening sky, Eärendil at its helm with the Silmaril blazing upon his brow. The great ship cut through the gathering clouds, its light piercing the shadow. As Melkor's armies approached, Eönwë gave the signal, and volleys of radiant arrows filled the sky. The great dragons shrugged off most hits, their scales proof against all but the most perfectly aimed shots. But where an arrow found its mark, it struck deep and true. The blessed air of Valinor echoed with roars of pain and fury as dragons fell, yet Morgoth's host pressed forward with even greater wrath. Light and darkness clashed on the golden plains. Dragons descended from above while Balrogs strode forward through walls of flame, their whips cutting bright arcs through the air. The returned heroes met them unflinching. Fingolfin's sword Ringil clashed against flames of shadow, while Túrin led the charge against thousands of great wolves that bounded ahead of the orc hordes. Orom's hunters broke through the dragon lines, their blessed spears finding marks between ancient scales, while Tulkas's warriors held against both the endless tide of orcs and the Balrogs' fury, their blessed weapons meeting whips of shadow and flame. High above the battlefield, Eärendil turned Vingolo toward the greatest threat, Ancalagon the Black. The mightiest of all dragons filled the sky with his vast wings, his shadow darkening the land below. The great ship and the dragon clashed above the realm of the Valar, each pass shaking the very air. Ancalagon's jaws snapped at Vingolo's hull, while Eärendil's arrows, burning with the Silmaril's light, found gaps between the ancient scales. Each clash sent shockwaves through the air. Ancalagon's breath melted entire cloud banks to steam, while Vingolo cut through the inferno, its hallowed bow breaking through waves of dragonfire. The Silmaril's radiance matched the dragon's darkness as ship and worm dueled across the sky of Valinor. Below, Sauron strode through the battle in terrible majesty, his form shifting between shadows and flames. His mace shattered shield walls with each swing, while spells of darkness burst among Tulkas's warriors, turning blessed armor to ash. Those who met his gaze found their courage failing, their ancient weapons turning heavy in their hands. Yet the warriors of Tulkas pressed forward still, their lord's strength flowing through them as they fought against both Sauron's physical might and his sorcery. Where Sauron's darkness spread, their weapons blazed brighter, meeting power with power on the fields of Valinor. From his towering height, Morgoth watched his lieutenant's victory with cold pleasure, yet his attention turned to greater prey. The Valar themselves now approached. Like mountains taking stride, the Valar assumed their full might. Manwë rose first, his form becoming a storm of divine winds and lightning, crowned with the very breath of Arda. Tulkas blazed with golden wrath, Orom's form dark as storm clouds, while others rose to match Morgoth's terrible stature. The ground shuddered as they approached their ancient brother. Eagles wheeled away from the sky between these colossal forms. Even the Maiar, themselves beings of tremendous power, fell back in awe. Below, warriors gripped their weapons tighter, though they knew their blades would be useless in this battle of powers beyond measure. Yet they had no time to witness more. Dragons still wheeled overhead, Balrogs still strode through flame, and the endless tide of Morgoth's armies pressed ever forward. Above this ceaseless battle, the confrontation of the powers unfolded. One by one they fell before him. Morgoth swept Orom aside with a single blow that would have shattered continents. Eönwë, mightiest of the Maiar, rose to challenge his ancient foe, but was cast down with terrible force, his divine light snuffed out like a candle in a storm. Tulkas's legendary strength faltered against darkness older than Arda itself. Even Manwë, mightiest of the Valar save Morgoth himself, could not withstand his brother's onslaught. The Dark Lord's laughter shook the foundations of Valinor as he scattered his siblings like leaves in a gale, each strike demonstrating why he had once been mightiest of all the Valar. His darkness consumed their light, each absorption making him stronger, his form growing until it shadowed the plains of Valinor itself. Yet Tulkas did not yield. The mighty wrestler seized Morgoth's arms as mountains might grip a storm, his golden strength matching the dark enemy's shadow. Through the chaos below, Túrin drove forward, his eyes fixed upon his ancient foe. Dragonfire scorched his armor black, Balrog whips carved burning furrows across his flesh, yet still he advanced. Gurthang cut through Morgoth's hosts, the black blade felling lesser dragons and cleaving Balrogs asunder. Behind him, Húrin and Fingolfin cleared his path, their blades keeping the endless hordes at bay. As Túrin approached the battling powers, blood streamed from 100 wounds, his armor shattered, his shield long since destroyed. Yet the fallen Valar's remaining light streamed toward him, and by Eru's will, his form grew to match the Titans themselves. Tulkas locked Morgoth in place with arms like bands of the world, though the dark enemy's fists struck his face again and again with force that shattered the air itself. Each blow would have split mountains, yet still Tulkas's grip held. Through this storm of titanic violence, Túrin leaped forward with newfound might. As Morgoth turned to deliver another crushing blow to Tulkas, Túrin's black sword found its mark. Gurthang blazed in his hands as he plunged it deep at the very point where Fingolfin had wounded Morgoth ages ago. Gurthang sank deep into Morgoth's essence, its dark edge cleaving through ancient power. Then shall the last battle be gathered on the fields of Valinor. In that day, Tulkas shall strive with Morgoth, and on his right hand shall be Eonwe, and on his left Túrin Turambar, son of Húrin, returning from the doom of men at the ending of the world. And the black sword of Túrin shall deal unto Morgoth his death and final end, and so shall the children of Húrin, and all men be avenged. Light and darkness exploded outward from the blow, and the impact threw all armies to the ground. The Dark Lord's vast form began to dissolve, his darkness unable to maintain cohesion, as Gurthang's own darkness consumed him from within, the blade at last fulfilling its destiny. As Morgoth's form dissolved into nothingness, his armies crumbled, dragons falling from the sky like burning stars, Balrogs shrinking to embers before vanishing into ash, their flames extinguished forever. The endless ranks of orcs withered like leaves in winter, while Sauron's shadow dispersed into the winds. The surviving warriors of Valinor lowered their weapons in exhausted wonder as the very world began to change around them. The earth shuddered, not in terror as before, but in anticipation of renewal. Great cracks appeared across Arda's surface, but from these wounds rose pure waters and unsullied earth. The seas churned, and from their depths rose the last Silmaril that Magla had cast into the waters. From the broken earth emerged another, long buried since Maedhros cast himself into fire. Above, Eärendil descended with the third jewel that had sailed the sky. Then Fëanor stepped forward, released at last from the halls of Mandos for this final purpose. In his hands he took the 3 Silmarils, the jewels he had wrought in the elder days. With strength born of destiny, he broke them, and their pure light flowed forth like liquid fire. Yavanna cupped this ancient radiance in her hands and knelt where the 2 trees had once stood. From the hallowed ground rose Telperion and Lorelin reborn, their mingled light stronger than ever before. The mountains of Valinor crumbled, their mighty peaks leveling to plains so that this holy light might reach every corner of the world. In this new radiance, the Valar themselves were transformed. Age and weariness fell away from them like old garments. Manwë's eyes shone with renewed sight. Aule's strength returned greater than before, while Tulkas's golden form blazed with restored vigor. From the halls of Mandos came the spirits of all elves who had ever died, their forms renewed in the light of the trees. They walked again upon the blessed earth, meeting their living kin with joy untold. Thereafter shall earth be broken and remade, and the Silmarils shall be recovered out of air and earth and sea, for Eärendil shall descend and surrender that flame which he hath had in keeping. Then Fëanor shall take the 3 jewels, and he will break them, and with their fire Yavanna will rekindle the 2 trees, and a great light shall come forth. And the mountains of Valinor shall be levelled, so that the light shall go out over all the world. Then rose a new music, deeper and richer than the first music that had shaped Arda. The Valar raised their voices first, but they were not alone. Elves and men joined the harmony, each understanding their part in the great song. From this music rose new lands, new seas, new skies, untouched by evil, unmarred by darkness. The world was remade as something greater, the final fulfillment of Iluvatar's design.